Praying Psalm 23 for 3 days awakens a deep spiritual alignment where inner peace, divine provision, and supernatural protection begin to manifest. There is something extraordinary that happens when you take this psalm beyond recitation and step into revelation. These words are not just beautiful poetry. They are spiritual architecture designed to rebuild your inner world. Every line carries a vibration from heaven that restores what fear, anxiety, and loss have broken down. When you pray it with faith for 3 days, it begins to reprogram your spirit, renew your mind, and realign your atmosphere to the rhythm of divine order. You stop surviving and start abiding. You stop worrying about what's ahead and start walking with the confidence that the shepherd is already there. The first thing that awakens within you during these 3 days is inner peace. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. When those words are spoken in faith, they penetrate the noise of the mind and bring rest to the soul. The world teaches us to strive, to chase, to compete, to accumulate, but the shepherd teaches us to rest, to trust, to receive. As you repeat this psalm over and over, the restless parts of you begin to quiet down. Your thoughts slow. Your emotions settle. You begin to feel a calm assurance that your life is held, guided, and provided for. It is not the absence of problems that gives this peace. It is the awareness of presence, the shepherd's presence. The same God who leads galaxies with precision is guiding you with care. When that truth becomes alive in you, worry begins to lose its power, fear loses its voice, anxiety loses its grip. I have seen people who lived years under pressure suddenly find relief through this revelation. There was a man who came to me once, trembling with anxiety about his future. He said, "I've prayed, but I can't feel God anymore." I handed him Psalm 23 and said, "Don't analyze it. Just pray it every morning and every night for 3 days. Let the words wash over you like rain." When he returned, tears filled his eyes. He said, "The circumstances haven't changed yet, but I feel peace. Real peace. That is the miracle of alignment. When your heart begins to believe that the shepherd is in control, the chaos loses control over you. The psalm realigns your spirit with heaven's calm. The second thing that awakens when you pray this psalm is divine provision. The line, "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures," is not just imagery. It is prophecy. It speaks of being led into places of divine supply. When you pray this psalm for 3 days, you are declaring to heaven and to yourself that lack no longer governs your reality. You are placing yourself under the economy of the shepherd, not the economy of the world. Suddenly ideas begin to come, resources begin to flow, connections begin to form. You start to notice doors that were always there but invisible to fear. The shepherd leads you to provision not by chance but by direction. He knows where the green pastures are. You only have to follow his voice. One night, a businesswoman came to one of our prayer meetings completely broken. Her company was on the verge of collapse. She said, "I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do." I told her, "For 3 days, don't pray for money. Pray Psalm 23. Let God be your shepherd." She did. On the second day, she felt prompted to reach out to an old contact she hadn't spoken to in years. That call became the bridge to a new contract that restored her business. She said later, "It wasn't the money that changed me, it was realizing I was never leading myself. God was leading me." That is what happens when you align your spirit with this psalm. Provision begins to follow peace. You stop chasing what you think you need, and what you truly need begins to chase you. The third dimension that awakens when you pray this psalm is supernatural protection. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Those are not just comforting words. They are declarations of authority. When you say them in faith, they build a shield around your spirit. They remind you that though darkness may surround you, it cannot enter you. The shadow cannot exist without light, and that means even in the darkest valley, the presence of the shepherd guarantees that light is near. Praying this psalm for 3 days fortifies your spirit against fear and spiritual attack. It reinforces your awareness that you are never alone. There was a missionary I once knew who traveled into regions where danger was constant. Before every journey, he would pray Psalm 23 for 3 days. He told me, "Every time I speak those words, I feel an invisible wall of peace surrounding me." He walked through situations that should have destroyed him, but he always came back untouched. He said, "The valley is real, but the shadow cannot harm you when the shepherd walks beside you." When you internalize this truth, you no longer react to threats. You respond with authority. You walk through life knowing that your steps are guarded, your path is protected, and your destiny is preserved. The fourth thing that begins to manifest through this prayer is divine order. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. The shepherd does not push, he leads. When you pray this psalm, your spirit begins to sync with the divine rhythm of guidance. You stop running ahead of God. You stop making decisions out of panic. You start to sense His gentle direction. When to move, when to wait, when to speak, when to be silent. Your soul finds restoration because confusion lifts. Many times our exhaustion doesn't come from physical strain, but from spiritual disconnection. When your spirit is misaligned, everything feels heavy. But when you begin to pray this psalm consistently, the shepherd's voice grows clearer and your path grows straighter. I have seen people who were lost in confusion suddenly gain clarity after praying this psalm for 3 days. They didn't receive an angelic visitation or a loud miracle. They received peace that revealed direction. Sometimes God doesn't change your environment. He changes your alignment so you can navigate the environment with wisdom. That's why this psalm is not just a prayer of comfort, it's a prayer of calibration. It tunes your soul to the shepherd's voice. The 5th thing that manifests is overflow. My cup runneth over. When your soul is aligned, when peace governs your heart, when provision flows, and when protection surrounds you, overflow becomes natural. Overflow is not just financial. It is emotional, spiritual, relational. It's the point where you are so filled with the presence of God that everything around you begins to reflect His goodness. When you pray this psalm, you are declaring that your cup will not run dry. You are shifting from a survival mindset to an abundance consciousness. The shepherd does not deal in scarcity, he overflows. He doesn't give just enough to get by. He gives until your cup spills onto others. That is the nature of divine alignment. And finally, when you pray this psalm for 3 days, your awareness of mercy and goodness multiplies. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. This line reprograms your expectation. You stop waking up waiting for something bad to happen. You start expecting goodness. You start seeing mercy even in mistakes, favor even in delay. The more you pray it, the more you realize that you are not being chased by misfortune. You are being followed by grace. This is the transformation that occurs when you pray Psalm 23 with revelation. It is not just about repeating words, it is about becoming one with the shepherd's voice. For 3 days your mind begins to quiet. Your heart begins to heal and your spirit begins to rise. You feel peace where there was panic, confidence where there was fear, supply where there was scarcity, and protection where there was danger. You begin to walk in rhythm with heaven. You begin to experience what it means to live under divine care. The shepherd leads and you follow, not in struggle, but in stillness, not in fear, but in faith, not in lack, but in abundance, as divine alignment brings peace, provision, and protection into perfect harmony within your life. When the Lord becomes your shepherd through faith and prayer, lack loses its authority and your life enters the flow of divine abundance and rest. There is a moment in every believer's journey where the difference between struggle and overflow comes down to one revelation: who is truly leading your life. You may attend church, read the Bible, and pray, yet still live as your own shepherd, trying to figure everything out, trying to make life work by your strength. But when you surrender leadership to the shepherd, everything changes. The psalm says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Those words carry a power that breaks the spirit of lack and releases divine sufficiency. When the Lord becomes your shepherd, lack loses its permission to operate in your life. Scarcity, fear, anxiety, and confusion bow before the presence of divine order. There are many who have prayed for prosperity, but have never submitted to the leadership of the shepherd. They want the blessings of the shepherd without following his voice. But abundance is not a random act of divine generosity. It is the consequence of divine alignment. When your life is positioned under the authority of the shepherd, you are no longer at the mercy of the world's systems. You are no longer tossed by the waves of uncertainty. The Lord himself takes responsibility for your journey. He begins to lead you, feed you, and protect you in ways that no human plan can replicate. You stop hustling for survival and begin to move with heaven's rhythm. I remember a young woman who came to me one evening, tears running down her face. She said, "Pastor, I've done everything I know to do, fasting, praying, working harder, but I still feel empty. I still feel like nothing is enough." I looked at her and said, "You've made the Lord your helper, but not your shepherd." She stared at me in confusion. I continued, "When the Lord is your helper, you still lead and he assists. But when he is your shepherd, he leads and you follow." She wept because that was the truth she had been missing. Many people invite God into their plans instead of asking to be led into his. But abundance is not found in control, it's found in surrender. When you let the shepherd take the lead, he guides you into provision that your own strength could never secure. When you pray and declare, "The Lord is my shepherd," you are making a covenantal statement. You are saying, "I no longer trust the systems of men to sustain me. I trust the voice of God to guide me." And the moment that becomes real, your spirit begins to rest. You stop competing with others because you realize your path is unique. You stop worrying about who has more, because you understand that the shepherd knows what is sufficient for your journey. He knows when to bring you into green pastures and when to lead you beside still waters. Everything he does is perfectly timed, perfectly designed, and perfectly aligned with your destiny. When the shepherd leads, lack loses power. Lack is not just financial, it's spiritual, emotional, and mental. It's the mindset that says, "I don't have enough. I'm not enough. I can't make it." But when the shepherd becomes your source, he replaces that scarcity mindset with the abundance of his presence. He fills the emptiness with his voice. He replaces confusion with direction. He restores your confidence with faith. And that transformation doesn't always start on the outside. It begins within. True abundance is first a condition of the soul before it manifests in the world. The shepherd doesn't just provide resources, he restores identity. There was a man who once told me, "Pastor, I've been working for years and yet I feel like I'm running in circles." I asked him, "Who told you where to run?" He paused and I continued, "If the shepherd didn't lead you, you're exhausting yourself on the wrong path." Many of us are tired not because we're weak, but because we're walking roads the shepherd never assigned. We chase after things he never promised and wonder why we feel empty. But when you surrender to his leadership, he brings order to your chaos. He knows the shortest path to abundance. He knows the route that avoids unnecessary pain. He knows where the blessings are already waiting for you. The moment you let him lead, divine rest enters your spirit. Abundance is not just about what you have, it's about how you live. The shepherd's abundance is not measured in possessions, but in peace. You can have money and still be poor in spirit. You can have comfort and still live in fear. But when the shepherd becomes your source, you begin to experience fullness that money cannot buy. The psalm says, "He restoreth my soul." That means he heals the part of you that anxiety has broken. He mends what the world has fragmented. He brings rest to your restless heart. You no longer wake up in fear of what might happen. You rise with faith in what God has already prepared. One of the most beautiful things about walking with the shepherd is that he doesn't just lead you to green pastures. He leads you through valleys. You learn that abundance doesn't mean the absence of challenges. It means you are never alone in them. The valley of the shadow of death is no longer a place of fear, because the shepherd walks beside you. And wherever he is, provision flows. Even in the valley, manna can fall. Even in drought, rivers can appear. When the shepherd leads, what should have destroyed you becomes the place where your faith multiplies. You begin to see the power of God in the very places the enemy tried to use to break you. I remember visiting a small church in a remote village years ago. The people were poor by worldly standards, yet their faces shone with joy. They had almost nothing, but they lacked nothing. I asked the pastor, "How do you live like this?" He smiled and said, "Because we have made the Lord our shepherd." Those people understood something deeper than comfort. They understood contentment. They followed the shepherd's voice daily, and somehow their needs were always met. They taught me that abundance is not what you store, it's who you follow. When the Lord is your shepherd, you stop depending on human promises. You stop fearing tomorrow because you know who holds it. The shepherd doesn't just lead you into places of provision. He transforms you into a vessel of provision for others. Your cup begins to overflow. People around you start to draw from your peace, your wisdom, your grace. You become a living testimony that God takes care of his own. That's the power of divine rest. Rest doesn't mean inaction. It means confidence. It means you no longer panic when others panic, because you know the shepherd is still leading. Lack thrives in the atmosphere of fear, but faith in the shepherd starves it. When your faith grows, lack shrinks. When you meditate on his faithfulness, worry disappears. You begin to see opportunities instead of obstacles. You start to notice how the shepherd has been leading you all along, how every closed door protected you, how every delay refined you, how every detour positioned you for blessing. When you realize that, you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Lead me." That's the shift that unlocks abundance. And this abundance is not limited to material things. It's the abundance of joy that overflows in sorrow, the abundance of peace that reigns in storms, the abundance of hope that refuses to die in waiting, It's the abundance of God's presence that transforms ordinary days into sacred moments. When the Lord becomes your shepherd, every step becomes guided, every need becomes supplied, and every burden becomes light. You begin to see that rest is not laziness, it's trust. It's the confidence that if the shepherd leads, you cannot be lost. If he feeds, you cannot go hungry. If he restores, you cannot remain broken. And as you walk with him daily, your heart learns to say, I shall not want. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is covered. Not because the road is easy, but because the shepherd is faithful. When the Lord becomes your shepherd, lack loses its authority and your life begins to move in the flow of divine abundance and rest that no man, no system, and no circumstance can take away.